Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our latest webinar. Today we're going to be talking about Yammer, which a couple of forces are using, and we're going to be explaining what it is. And I'm really pleased that we've got our expert, Chris, from Microsoft, who's going to join us today and take us through this. Chris has got a huge amount of experience about Yammer and how it works, but don't worry, Nick's here as well, and Nick will be getting involved in the conversation as we need to, as we move it forward. So just a reminder to you, if it's one of your first Wednesday webinars from the NEP, we record these events every week. We broadcast them live. Please get your questions into the comments box. We will go to questions as we go through the session, and we aim to have you away by 12:30. So it's an ideal chance to have your lunch and watch a webinar and get involved. And say the recordings will be available on the transformation.police.uk/watch website later on today, with all the other recordings that are there, and we know that you get some real value out of watching them. And again, so you can use this content in your own force area. You can embed the content into your own SharePoint or intranet sites as well, so you can please share it on. So today we're going to be focusing on Yammer, and Yammer is a piece of technology that's in the build. It's in the secure space. It's part of the MOU, which just by the way has been published today, the new MOU deal between the government and Microsoft, which policing is part of. But it is a part of the platform, and Chris will take us through a few things today on how it can work and how it can really help our internal engagement. Those of you that know my history, I've been involved in the social media work around policing for 10, 11, possibly even longer years. And so Yammer is possibly the answer to our internal social media issues that we need to be looking at, and we'll cover that. So we already had a question in the queue just as we were starting about what is Yammer, and I think I'm going to go straight to Chris with that one. And so what is Yammer? What's different to Teams, and why do we need it if we've got Teams?
All right. Well, nice segue. Yeah, it was a great setup, and thanks for having me. So why did they ask me to come? I actually ran the Yammer network for Microsoft internally for about 4 years before taking this role and moving to the UK to do so. So I do know a bit about the good, the bad, and the ugly of what it is, what it means to run Yammer, and what its power and potential are. So let me go ahead and share my screen, actually, where I've got some slides. We don't do a lot of slides here. We're going to do a lot of demo today, so that you can actually see how it works and see it in action. But let's start with what makes Yammer different. And if I boil it down, I always think about Office 365 as this massive suite of tools. It's kind of logo soup that we throw at you with all these different things that are in the toolkit. But there are three kind of what I call hero experiences, because if conversation is what it is that drives collaboration, that drives our work forward, then there are three main modes of conversation, right? So if email, Outlook, becomes all about me, it becomes all about just the things that are sent directly to me that are important to me. Teams is the place where we work together. That's where we're working together day to day, and probably I spend most of my time in Teams now today. But Yammer is a place for all of us. So think about me, we, and us. That's the three-legged stool on which all of the conversation that happens in Office 365 sits. And so Yammer is a key piece of that. Now, do you probably spend more like 10% of your time in Yammer versus the other two? Probably, but that doesn't mean it's not important, because it does some very key specialized things really well. So we've got here in this slide the three kind of pillars that Yammer is designed around nowadays. You've got communities, knowledge, and engagement. So what do we mean by that? We mean engaging with leadership. We mean talking at a company-wide level, having conversations in a community of people, not a team that's working day to day, but people that I might have that have the same role, might work in the same organization, but don't work together day to day necessarily. There are lots of different pivots and aspects to an organization, and they're not all about, today's work. They are about what it's like to work here, for example. and sharing knowledge, yes, you can do that in Teams, but not at scale, because Teams by its nature is exclusive. In other words, it's only the members of the team that see any of the posts in there. So in order for everybody to see it, you could send an email to everybody, but how many of those do you actually read? That just doesn't happen. You can have an interactive conversation with the entire organization and share knowledge across at scale using Yammer. So the first two are definitely, first two of these four that are on this slide here are definitely not done in Teams and not done very well in email. So this is where Yammer's strengths really are. And, you know, bottom line here is to remember that rolling out Yammer is a culture decision, not a technology decision, really. And the evidence that I have for that actually comes from my own story. So Microsoft's story of adopting Yammer ourselves really tells the importance of leadership and culture well. So I started managing Yammer for Microsoft in 2012, and that was under Steve Ballmer. Now, when I say this, this is not a criticism of Steve Ballmer. He had his strengths and very important to Microsoft at the time. It's just a recognition of his style. He never once posted to Yammer in the 2 years that I was running it under him. On day one of 2014, all of that changed. Satya Nadella, the man in the middle, took the reins as CEO of the company. He set up a group called CEO Connection, posted there himself to say, this is where you can all reach out to me with questions, concerns, whatever. I won't necessarily read every post. You know, he set the expectation right up front. But I will be watching, listening, and time to time engaging here. And that set a tone for the culture. And there have been books written on the cultural transformation that Satya has driven within Microsoft. That's no secret. So my point that I'm making here is that it was a cultural decision and a strategic decision for leadership to embrace Yammer for very specific purposes, for driving and shaping the culture of the company, as well as driving the kinds of conversations that they wanted and needed to have. So that's one reason. Another good reason, if we don't provide for this way to connect, then really we are just kind of burying our head in the sand, aren't we? Prior to Yammer, for example, Microsoft found thousands of private Facebook groups that were doing Microsoft business. We know that there is a WhatsApp problem within public sector in general, and even beyond public sector. If we don't recognize that some of those conversations that are happening in WhatsApp really ought to be happening in secure and compliant platforms. Many of those conversations should be happening in Teams, frankly, but many of them should probably be happening in Yammer because they are more about how we work rather than the work itself, if that makes sense.
Chris, and the IOPC have picked up on that in policing. There is a report that's been published, which has been circulated to chief officers, which highlights that very issue. And you know, the lack of being able to have that governance around WhatsApp and other platforms is becoming an issue that is going to attract attention.
Yeah. So, you know, it's really not a question of whether you need Yammer. You do. The question is, what are you going to use it for? And that's really the most important question, because leadership and sponsorship of those scenarios are going to be absolutely critical, more than training or communications or anything else. You need to lead with the scenarios. And I've got a slide here. I mean, sales obviously doesn't really necessarily apply to you folks, but almost all the rest of them do, I think. We all have, you know, human resources functions, marketing functions. There's all these scenarios that we see happening and shining in Yammer. So I think these are some great examples, things to pick up on. Find your sponsor over in HR or in, you know, your IT or, you know, whichever departments are appropriate. Communications, obviously one of the key ones, and work with them to find out what are the challenges that they are facing that would map well to Yammer. In talking with David, we stumbled across this notion as well. So we understand that there is a very active, vibrant community on Twitter amongst policing. And for example, there is a WeCops. There's actually, how many WeCops related accounts were there, David? You said something.
No, the WeCops is a debate that happens every Wednesday evening or every other Wednesday evening. But when I was leading the social media project, we found over 5,000 individual officer Twitter accounts across England and Wales, and we know that was only scratching the surface of it.
Right, right. So there's, yeah, as I say, a vibrant, active conversation about this. But you're having all that conversation out in public. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that necessarily. So Yammer, I don't think necessarily replaces that, but it could certainly augment it with a different kind of conversation that you could have internally on the same topics. So that's just something to keep in mind as we then go into demo. So I'm going to talk about the new Yammer. If you haven't seen Yammer in a couple of years, well, hold fast in your seatbelts, because it looks completely different now. And that includes, sorry, I went back there. That includes the mobile experience, completely different than it did just 2 years ago. Last year, they had this huge marketing push about the year of Yammer, and the reason for that was that it was a massive facelift and overhaul. So, demo time. Let me switch now to that demo. So Cumbria Police, I'm sure you're on here. You're getting special treatment today. I just happened to grab a bunch of Cumbria Police images to showcase, to brand it up a little bit. This is a demo environment. There is very limited activity, limited posts because of that, right? Just a few sample posts, but you'll see the concepts, I think, as I go through this. So one of the big changes is that there is a community. So all of the what used to be called groups on Yammer, the Yammer network can be divided up into little groups. We used to call them groups. We're now calling them communities, really to kind of focus and hone in on what the purpose of Yammer is for now. So these are all now called communities, and there is a community called, by default, it's called All Company, that everyone in your tenant is automatically a member of, and they can't leave. So it's really kind of the default place that you can post when there isn't a community that seems appropriate. But one of the big changes is you can now brand that. So we can now, say that this is, the Cumbria Police Network, for example, and have some branding to make people feel at home. You'll forgive me if I haven't picked ideal photos through here, but one of the things you need to do is make sure that not only are you putting images in here, but over on the right there's a pane for information about any given community, and right there on the All Company one or All Staff, you can describe your vision for Yammer. What is your vision for Yammer? What should people do when they arrive here? And have some links to key communities and or even directly to important posts or other documents that are there. The publisher that you see here, this is what we call the place that you post. Offer several different types of posts. You can either post a standard discussion, just post something out, share a link or what have you. You can post a question, so it formats it differently and has some special features, which I'll show you in a minute. You can post praise, so that's a great way to send kudos, praise to others. And you can run polls, which are very good for driving some engagement too. So I'm just going to paste in here a post. You'll notice that you can do some light formatting on it. So if I click this button here, I've got some basic formatting, so you're not limited to just text. Then I can also, and this is a little trick that not many people know, you can actually do, if you do a screen grab, which is what I'm doing right now, just a little screenshot, you can actually just paste that right into Yammer. So I don't have to actually go and find a file and save it and upload it. I can just do a quick screen grab and do my post. And you'll notice that it actually turned out, turns these hashtags into what are called topics. I can then click on that hashtag and see, so just like social media that you're familiar with, I can click on that hashtag and see posts from across the network that include that hashtag. So simple post there. So one of the other things I was going to point out here is that when you do a post, you can also have next to the formatting bar here, you have this option here, which is an announcement. So if you make this an announcement, it's a special kind of post that sends and pushes a notification to email. If they're signed up to get Yammer notifications in email, it sends a notification out to all the members of that group. So that does mean, if you're thinking about this, it does mean that if I posted a announcement here in the all staff community, you would actually be sending, it would act much like a company-wide email. So you do want to pick your administrators for that group carefully, right? So because they would have that power. All right, so let's see. So another common example, just to move from this generic community to some specific examples, is the executive connection scenario, right? So your leadership in your forces do want to be connected to the front lines. I've talked to them, they want a greater connection, and we need to find a way that works for them. So they don't all need to be Satya. You need to find a way that works for them. And they don't have to personally post in Yammer that often, but they do need to be visible, show up somehow, some way. We have a partner that's actually crunched a bunch of data from across the world, from Yammer customers across the world. And what they've found is that all it takes is 3 likes, 2 replies, and 1 post on a regular basis from an executive leader to really show up and have an effect. What they found was that those networks that were really active and vibrant and had a lot of participants had a leader who was following that pattern, roughly. So no more than 30 minutes a week, right? 15 minutes a week. They could spend liking a few posts, replying to a couple people, just so people see that they're participating, that this is a valid and an important channel for engaging. All right, a few tips around moderation for community managers, and you do need one. Be sure that any community that you stand up on Yammer isn't just oh, let's create it because we can and walk away. These are conversations that need to be nurtured. So you know, any given community should have a manager. Those are the admins of a particular community. There are 2 up here, Alan and Megan, that are admins of this particular community. And there's a couple of things that you can do here that are specifically geared towards those community managers, right? Some functions specifically for moderation of a community and improving the interaction. So you can, one of the things you'll notice right up at the top here is that this conversation is pinned. So you see it says pinned conversation. So that's something that I can do with any post. So I can take this post, for example, if I hit the 3 dots here, you get a couple of different options. So I can, this is where I can pin the conversation. That just, so there can only be one conversation pinned to the top of any given community. So if I pin this one, it'll replace the other one. But that just, you know, calls people's attention to the most important posts according to you, the community manager. Notice I can also close the conversation. So this becomes important, particularly for those threads that kind of, if you've ever had an email thread that just started to keep going on and on and on, and it was just time to wrap this up and take it to a meeting, or they were just beating a dead horse, or it was getting too controversial for whatever reason, this conversation needs to just stop now. And so that we can move on and take it in a different direction or whatever. And so you have that capability as a community manager to close that down then, so that no further replies can be added to that. One of the other tools that you can use is to follow a conversation as well. So by follow, that means you're going to get all the updates to a conversation from an inbox. And as a community manager, you might not want to chime in on a conversation, but you might want to follow along. So you could just follow that conversation and the updates to it will show up in your inbox over here. You can also delete and move. So I can actually delete other people's posts as a admin of that community. Of course, you can delete your own posts. You can also move them, which is really helpful, because if somebody is posting in the wrong community, right? So they just posted here, perhaps in the all company feed, and they just weren't aware that there was a community that was more appropriate for that post. You can easily just move it to keep your community more focused on and on topic. So that's important too. You'll also see this filter up here that says all conversations by default. So if I drop this down, you've got a few ways of filtering the conversations that are in here now too. So I can look at just the ones that I haven't seen before. That's the new ones. I can also look at all questions. So that's again that question type that I showed you earlier. So if I go ahead and post a question here, and you'll notice that this community actually has questions as the default post type. So I can say, you know, when is our next holiday? I don't know, stupid question, but something to post. Okay. If I ask that question, then if somebody replies to that, and I can actually do a reply to that over here, I'm logged in as somebody else in another browser. So I'll just do a quick reply to that tomorrow. Okay. So here comes my reply to that question. So what I can do as the owner of that post, I think I might need to refresh or something. Let me go to unanswered questions filter. Okay, there we go. So I can see her question, and my question is not officially answered until I say, as Alan, as both the original poster and in this case also the admin of the group, either one of those people can say on this yeah, right here on this post, I can say this is the best answer for that. And when I tick that, it's going to pop that reply up to the top of that thread and keep it pinned there as the best answer for that question. So that's really important for especially Q&A type communities. Okay. One of the other things I can do is create a live event. So we are in a live event, yes, and so one thing you can do is host a live event. We're just hosting this live event and doing it publicly. You can actually host your live event in Yammer. So people would come to Yammer and see the video there and be able to answer questions. And so the way to start that off, I'm not going to demonstrate this whole thing as it can be long, but I'm going to say, you know, I'm just going to do some basic things. You set the presenters, you set the producers, and pick your start and end date. And I'm going to go, let's see, no, it's not a test event, go next. And so you can choose, by default, you are actually producing your event in Teams. So you produce it the same way you do the live event that we're in today, but the video actually shows up in Yammer. So if I click create, then it's going to put the event over here on the events tab. Well, there's a page for that event. People can ask their questions there, and then they can find it from the events tab here, but you send them a link to the event. So I won't go into more detail on that, but just know that you can create a live event there on Yammer as well and have those broad conversations. If you want more information on how to run those live events, whether it's on Yammer or elsewhere, I encourage you to go to the Yammer adoption site. So if you go to adoption.microsoft.com and then find the section on Yammer, or just go /Yammer, down here you will see there's a section for leaders and communicators, and there's a link here, how to host a live event in Yammer. Leads you to this excellent playbook that takes you step by step through it. It's a 28-page document that takes you through the whole process. So lots of guidance on how best to do that. So another common use case in Yammer is actually using Yammer to roll out Office 365. So this is an open forum where users can ask users. That's an ideal way to reduce the load on your support desk, a place for your digital champions, which I hope you have, to really shine and help each other out. And so you can set a group like this to have questions as the default post type, and so on. So I've also mocked up here a WeCops community. So back to that conversation that we were having earlier, you know, we could have that conversation internally, and how would that conversation change, right? If it's an internal only conversation, we know the general public isn't watching. If it was limited to just your force, what would be the nature of the conversations? How much more relevant and actionable would that conversation be? And then you could take that conversation over to Twitter and even enrich that conversation a little bit more.
And certainly, Chris, we've had feedback from colleagues who don't want to use their personal profiles to identify themselves as police. They could do that internally in their force on Yammer, and then the WeCops representatives in that force can take that conversation into the wider space, which adds more value to it. You know, so it can be built in a number of ways. As normal, time is running away from us, as we always do with these webinars, and there's a lot of ways we could apply this across policing. So Teams is very much about, I see it as delivering the business, delivering the service to the public and talking about the operational things, and that's where data is official sensitive and Teams is secured to that, where Yammer, and we always get the question about information security, it's hosted in the US or whatever, but Yammer really isn't for that personal detail about the delivery of the service. As you said earlier, it's more about how we deliver service or how we join people together.
Yeah, and you can also, you have the option of migrating your network over to the EU if that makes you feel more comfortable. But yes, absolutely. You know, this is not the place to be posting about a particular case, right? This is the place to be talking about how we go about the duties of policing and improving that and innovating on it. Right.
So potentially you'd have all PCSOs subscribing to a community, no matter which community which policing area they're in, and imagine at 2 in the morning somebody needs to fill in a form in custody and there's nobody on their shift handy who's available. A Yammer group of all PCs and whoever's on duty can give that answer. The questions point and you get the best people to vote the answers up. A bit like you see on some of the internet forums that you get, who's got the best answer for this, or even the Yammer support community.
One of the most valuable Yammer communities that I'm a member of is the Modern Workplace Customer Success Manager. That's my role, that's my title. Community that's global. So all, 400, 500 of us, however many there are, Nick, across the world can share some of the challenges that we're facing, maybe not specifics, and get help from each other, and that's been invaluable.
Okay, so there's a question in from Anna at David Powis who's asking about, can we share links and other content on Yammer across the so, and I'll happily bring up something I borrowed with pride from yourself, apparently, which we discovered earlier this week, the matrix that we put into the enabling center for around communications. I don't know if it's screen sharing properly yet. Yes, this is the challenge of being the live producer as well as the driving the event. So you've got the matrix on there, and we can talk about the journey of a piece of content in SharePoint News being shared into a Yammer group that gets picked up by a sergeant and puts it into a Teams conversation, and then an officer picks it up and emails it to a colleague. That is all part of that communications network that can happen. And you came up with the original concept for this matrix result.
Yeah, because I've been thinking about this challenge for a long time, but the beauty of the way that this is evolving is, of course, that these things are all starting to integrate, right? So we can now experience and interact with Yammer from Teams. So there's a communities app that you can add to Teams that allows people to not have to leave Teams to interact with their teams and then with the communities as well, just with a different app. And there's more interaction embedded in Outlook and in SharePoint as well. So yeah, it's all coming together.
It's all coming together. So a couple of other questions that are in the chat. And Nick, do you want to pick any out in particular?
Yeah, there's an interesting one here around searchability in Yammer. So Chris, lending your experience that you have there around, searching for specific content in Yammer, does it use e-discovery? What's the sort of back end here, and how successful are those searches?
Oh, so okay. So you threw in e-discovery there, and that threw me a little bit. So if we're just talking about search and discoverability of things in Yammer in general, then search is better than it was and improving. I think it could use some even more improvement, filters and whatnot. By default, you're searching within a given community. If we're talking about e-discovery, then yes. So some investments during that year of Yammer last year was really about getting it into the same. I'm going to use the technical term that they used was substrate, but basically it's in the same data center, the same store that e-discovery and legal holds and all those kinds of things operate on now. So yes, it is now covered by those compliance features.
Thank you.
There's a couple of questions about
you do have to get into native mode. So I don't have time to explain that, but just search on Yammer native mode and it'll explain that. So yeah.
There's a couple of questions there about moderation of posts, Chris, and what can you say about how we can moderate a community in a more effective way?
Well, I showed a couple of those things. So there was, being able to filter to find the unanswered questions, making sure people get answers to questions is actually one of the core roles of a community manager. But being able to close down a conversation or delete it if it's really necessary or move it or what have you. Quick data point, though. I mean, people worry about people posting inappropriate things. I managed one of the largest Yammer networks in the world for 4 years, and HR only ever asked me to take down 2 posts in that time. Your photo and your name is right next to everything you post. It's a career-limiting move to do things inappropriately. So it's just less of an issue than most people believe.
And I'm going to allow ourselves just to run over a couple more minutes because there are some really good questions in there. How is the best way to adopt it? Is it a small little trial or go big or go home approach for taking Yammer forward into a force?
Yeah, thank you for that. So what I would definitely, the funny answer is that I think it's both. So what you do is you make sure that you have some sponsored, highlighted communities that have the resources behind them, and you put all of your marketing effort behind that. To make it about the scenarios and about the conversations that we're having more than about Yammer. This isn't about turning on a new tool. This is about enabling new kinds of conversations and make the launch about that. But the thing not to do is to limit it to a certain number of people that you give it to. So you give it to everybody so that you can get that economy of scale and get that broad conversation, which is what Yammer's all about, going. But you can be very pointed and specific with the scenarios that you're going after at launch.
Thanks, Chris. That's really useful. And I think it brought down to what you said at the beginning about a leadership. It's not a technical implementation, this, in many ways. This is about a leadership setting a tone. And I suppose leaders challenging when we're still using other platforms for things that could be, we've now provided through the Yammer platform to be the solution for. So, and again, moving some of the Teams chat into Yammer might reduce the burden on Teams, for instance.
Yeah, I would argue, can you survive without Yammer? Of course you can, but will you thrive without it?
That's fantastic. So, Chris, we are out of time, as we always run out of time on these webinars, and we could carry on for longer, but we know that your feedback from the users is that you want them short and snappy. And what we'd like to do is, if forces want to get more detail into a Yammer, we'll potentially work with Nick and Microsoft and Chris to set up a comms workshop on this. So please get in touch with myself over at the NEP. Please note our email address. These are still transformation, but you can also use pds.police.uk as we're part of the PDS approach moving forward. The recording of this will be available. Keep the questions coming in. We'll try and answer a couple more as we move forward. Next week, we're taking Teams into custody. We're going to go up to North Yorkshire to look at how they've been using it. Or was it West Yorkshire, Mike? I can never remember. I should have wrote it down clearer on my notes. But we're going to be hearing from a force about how they've been able to implement Teams into custody and the benefits that's delivered, not just around the pandemic, etc. And then we've got a couple more coming up in the future where we're going to be revisiting with Thames Valley. If you saw us last week about their managing teams in Teams, they're going to be looking at how they did their file share. So we keep an eye on the Enabling Centre. If you have the link, I did post it in earlier on. Hit the website. We're constantly putting content up there about how Teams has been more effective. But really importantly, if you've got a story to share about how you're using Microsoft 365 to benefit your force, please get in touch and we can feature you in these webinars, add you to the Solutions Centre, add you to the Enabling Centre, so we can all benefit from the way moving forward. Once again, I thank Chris in particular for joining us as a special guest this week. Nick is always with us, which is fantastic. Hope you can join us next week. We'll be posting the details out on email, on the Enabling Centre and on the website for the next webinars as we move forward. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.